Okay, so Mackenzie, would you like to start?
Yes, so thank you everybody for joining us today. We are here with Deborah Lewinsky, who is going to speak today on Canadian workplace culture. I am Mackenzie Spies, and Olga Ochoa is also with us. We both work for MacEwan's School of Continuing Education. So we are hosting this webinar today, and we are very lucky to have Deborah presenting with us again. If you've been here for a few minutes, you might have heard Olga mention that Deborah did a previous webinar with us on intercultural communication skills, and Olga dropped the YouTube link to that in the chat. So it's related topics. If you weren't there for the first one, and you enjoyed today's topic, it's really good sessions that go hand in hand. So we definitely encourage you to watch that one as well. This is being recorded right now, so in a couple days, all of the registrants and attendees are going to get a link to the email or to the recording. So we like to start with a Treaty 6 land acknowledgement. Debbie, if you could show me that slide, please.
Yeah, I will just, yeah.
Great. So we acknowledge that the land on which we gather in Treaty 6 territory is the traditional gathering place for many Indigenous people. We honor and respect the history, languages, ceremonies, and culture of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who call this territory home. The First Peoples' connection to the land teaches us about our inherent responsibility to protect and respect Mother Earth. With this acknowledgement, we honor the ancestors and children who have been buried here, missing and murdered Indigenous women and men, and the process of ongoing collective healing for all human beings. We are reminded that we are all treaty people and of the responsibility we have to one another. And then I would also like to take this opportunity to introduce our speaker for today, Deborah Lewinsky. So Deborah is a native Albertan and a University of Alberta graduate who taught in the public education system for many years before taking the opportunity to work overseas. Deborah worked in Chad, Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea in West Africa, Mozambique in East Africa, and Iraq in the Middle East. She is an experienced instructional designer, operations entry-level foundational trainer, and English language coordinator and instructor. Skilled in cultural competency and curriculum, she has taken all her skills and worked successfully in the oil and gas industry. Deborah is currently teaching in the Department of Continuing Education International at MacEwan University in Edmonton. There she continues to work with international students and teach intercultural communication skills and Canadian workplace culture, a program that she developed. She has also taught literacy to newcomers in Canada. And so with that, Deborah, please take it away.
All right, thank you, and welcome everybody this afternoon. The sun is shining, and so welcome to our next webinar on the Canadian workplace culture. As we know, Canada is a very diverse country where the expectations of the workplace may vary from culture to culture, and the rules of work are very country specific. So in this webinar today, we will focus on understanding the Canadian workplace culture and the expectations that it has to be successful. And all of this in the Canadian workplace and within the Canadian context, there are expectations that form an organization cultural practice. So taking a look at the Canadian workplace today, we will look at it in terms of culture, and we will take a look at it in terms of the people that work within the organizations within the Canadian workplace. Which brings us to the objectives. So today, hopefully I can help you to have an understanding and perhaps identify the cultural iceberg model in relationship to workplace culture. So if you were in my last webinar, you will have had an introduction to this as well, but not to worry for those of you that weren't, I will give you an overview of it as well. Then we will talk about what are Canadian company cultures? What are the beliefs that go along with it? And the Canadian workplace cultural expectations in terms of values. And then, of course, the visible values and beliefs, which are the physical things that we can see. And then in the end, hopefully we'll have some time to talk about Canadian workplace misunderstandings. Now, this is a very big topic, Canadian workplace culture. So hopefully today I will be able to impart a little bit about a lot of things and to help you just understand perhaps a model that would give you some understanding, or people that you work with, or take a look at your organization to be successful. So what is the Canadian workplace culture? Well, to begin with, let's take a look at the cultural iceberg model in relationship to the Canadian workplace. So the iceberg model, and for those of you that were in the last webinar, you'll remember this, but for those of you that weren't, the iceberg model, it was created by Edward Hall. And what he did is he equated culture to an iceberg. And he said that every culture has their own iceberg. And in that iceberg, you have your beliefs, you have your values, and then you have that physical part, the part that can be seen. And every culture has, and with every culture, there is the values, and every culture has these identifiers that tell you who they are. So the iceberg is like that. So 10% of the iceberg can be seen. So this is the 10% above the waterline that can be seen. So this is the if you go on a holiday, what you see in the culture, you know, the way that people dress, the artwork, the literature, how people act, the language, the way they dress, the food. And then if you go beneath that, and if you happen to stay within a culture for a longer period of time, you have the values that are important to them. You have the ethics, the basis of their belief systems. What are their customs? What are the culture's view on family, relationships, rearing children? So all of this makes up a culture. And every person has their own cultural iceberg. We all have our own cultural iceberg that we were brought up in. We all have our own beliefs. We all have our own values. We all have the way that we dress depicts a lot of what we believe, the way that we work. And so if we equate this to Canada and the Canadian diversity, we find that each person has their own cultural iceberg, and each of us, we view the world from our own set of cultural identifiers. Plus, with this, we have our own rules of how we work and how they can vary. So each person comes from their own culture. Each person has their own cultural iceberg. And now we can even take this even one step further, and we can say that every workplace or every organization, they too have their own cultural identifiers. They have their own. So each company or workplace has its own cultural iceberg. So if we take a look at that, so like the iceberg model, there are 3 levels of an organization. There's the physical, there are the values, and there are the beliefs. And I like to think of it from the bottom up. You go from what is the basis, the groundwork, the beliefs. And the beliefs are those like the code of conduct. The beliefs are the mission statements. They're the best practices of a company or a workplace. And then out of these beliefs, you get your values. So the values are what's important. What are the ways that you want to work? What are the goals? Integrity and honesty. These are all parts of the values that workplace that creates the wholeness of it. So from these beliefs, you have your values. And then from your beliefs and values, you have that outward. So when people come into an organization, it's what they see. It's the physical aspect of what they see, from the building to the architecture, from the way that you greet each other. Is it an open space? Is it a closed space? Is it more traditional? So that's more of what we see. So a company can also be equated to an iceberg. So at the bottom, it's what the company or the organizations believe. What are the underlying assumptions of the organization? So and then we go into what are the ideals? What are the goals and values set out by the company? What What do they value? What do they want to achieve? What direction are they moving in? And then from that, we have the behaviors. So the systems, the processes, the policies that are set into place. So every company can also be equated to have their own cultural iceberg. There's also one thing I wanted to add here too, is when we talk about the values in the company, that's a big part of that is the people that come into the organization. So if you have people in your workplace or your organization that really resonate with the values of the company, with that whole belief system, the code of conduct, the whole mission statement, it's like, yes, I really believe in this company. They're probably going to have a pretty good chance of success of coming in because it's something, maybe the way that they're used to working, or it aligns with their own personal goals. So it's pretty successful to be in that company. However, if you have, because it's the people that make up this big part of the values, they're doing the work for the company and in the workplace, if their values are different, or if their values are not as important as what the company is, sometimes people will get a job, but they may not stay that long because they'll find that it's really not aligned, maybe the way that it works, the ways of working. Sometimes they'll have to leave because it doesn't align with their own personal set of beliefs or values. However, if you have a newcomer or somebody who's new to that workplace, say in Canada, whose values, because of their own personal iceberg from their culture in which they are coming, are working, you can find it's also very different. So in this case, there may have to be some training, there may have to be some teamwork, something that helps to mentor, something that helps to help the person to be successful. And today we're going to talk about what are some ways that we can do that. So each company workplace has its own cultural iceberg. And again, this is like a summary, and each cultural iceberg has its own sets of beliefs and values. And these beliefs and values are determined by the cultural identifiers of the workplace. So that's in the value part. And they become the workplace or company's actions or way of doing things. So understanding the Canadian iceberg model analogy can lead to clarity of the Canadian workplace in terms of cultural expectations. So if we can step back and say, this is the cultural iceberg of this workplace or this organization within Canada, because often we'll find that the Canadian workplace is really echoing the beliefs and values under the umbrella of Canada itself. And as we go through that, we will find that there is documentation by the Government of Canada that really leads in terms of understanding cultural diversity, leads in cultural understanding. So let's talk about the bottom section of that cultural iceberg of the workplace. It's that belief, the belief section. In Canada, as I was saying, and this piece of information is actually taken from a document by the Government of Canada, which they've recently updated a lot of parts of their document. And it says, understanding the reason behind the norms and protocols increases your chance of success and ability to adapt in a business setting. So the Government of Canada is acknowledging this diversity. The Government of Canada is acknowledging that if we can understand the reasons behind these differences, and in terms of doing things, in terms of the protocol, then we can probably be successful in adapting to the business setting. So diversity, understanding, which is Canada, and if we can take all of this now and apply it to the business setting, there's probably going to be a pretty good chance of success. there is also a study that was done by Professor Geert Hofstede, and he was, I'll just go here. And what he did is he conducted one of the most comprehensive studies of how values in the workplace are influenced by culture. So what he did is he went into several countries and he talked to people, he interviewed them, he did many questionnaires, and he did this very intensive research. And what he found is that there are 6 dimensions of really, when you talk about the workplace and trying to understand people's way of working in the workplace. He said, if you can understand these, then you're probably going to have some pretty good understanding of how your workplace operates, and in terms of if there's any kind of diversity or trying to understand the differences. So Geert Hofstede, he presented this findings through a matrix. Now, this is also another interesting point, is this man is referenced, and he said, culture is the way that we do things around here. So the way that we do things around here is here in the workplace, here in Canada, here in maybe if you're doing business with another company who's overseas that has a different culture, you can use this to help you understand. The government of Canada, as I was saying, they reference him. They at the Trades Commission, there's a section in the, it's there. The Trades Commission actually references Geert Hofstede. And this is from the government of Canada. And what it is, it's a matrix of 6 cultural dimensions that every culture can be ranked on. And what it does is it provides insight on cultural reasons for why social norms and business practices are in place. So Geert Hofstede, what he did is he created the 6 dimensions of culture based on extensive research. So each country has their own character according to these dimensions. And this is the 6 of them: power distance, individualization versus collectivism, uncertainty avoidance, masculinity versus femininity, long-term orientation and short-term orientation, and indulgence and restraint. So what do those mean? Again, this is taken right from the Government of Canada's website, but I will explain each of them a bit for you. So what, to help you have a better understanding. So Geert Hofstede, his research was that if you can understand the differences in 6 different areas in terms of business, it can help you to be successful in what you're doing. So in terms of power distance, so power distance, that means that power is shared and is widely dispersed, and that the social members do not accept situations power is distributed equally. So in other words, if a person has a very high power distance, it means that they're centralized organizations. They acknowledge that there's a leader status, that you're aware that you may need to go to the top for answers. So the difference between the management and the people that work is the difference is very wide. So you have to go to a lot of steps. If you're going to go see management, you usually wouldn't see the management, wouldn't usually come down and visit. So it's very step-by-step, very hierarchical. But if you have a low power distance, and if you have a low power distance within an organization, it sort of flattens the organization. The supervisors and employees are considered to be equal. There's a lot of delegation within power distance. And ideally, you try to involve as many people as you can in decision making. I'm going to talk about this one a little bit. I'll use an example in a bit. The next one is individualism versus collectivism. And with this one, this refers to the strength of the ties that people have in with others within their organization. So for example, in a high individual, it's a lot more about family. It's about me and my immediate family. That's where my focus goes. If it's more collective, it's more relationship based. It's broader. It's more, if it's a family, it's my family and it's my cousins and my uncles. So the family gets very big. So it's very, very relationship based. However, in the workplace, if an individualistic workplace acknowledges individuals' accomplishments. So if it's an individual accomplishments, you don't mix work life much with your social life. You encourage debate and expression of people's ideas. However, if it's a lower in terms of collectivism, wisdom is really, so wisdom of the group is really acknowledged. You suppress your feelings and emotions because you don't want to disrupt it. You want to keep harmony. And if you say no too many times, you actually could lose face. So there's a difference between the relationship of a large group of people than individual. It's more about myself. So masculinity versus femininity, again, this has to deal with, in masculinity, it's dealing with your successes and being strong and fast. And these are seen as very positive characteristics. It's about success. It's about getting things done. It's perceived as a virtue. However, greater importance with femininity, greater importance is placed on good relationships with your direct supervisors or working with other people to really incorporate one another. If you have a company that's or you're working in an organization that's very masculine, you're probably going to find that money and achievement are really important in a situation, very strong egos. You have to be aware of the possibility of differentiating gender roles. It's a very long hours culture. And people are motivated by precise targets and by being able to really show that they've achieved something. However, the opposite of that, if you talk about femininity, you're talking about relationships, more focused on quality. And in the workplace, if it's with the femininity, success is more likely to be achieved through negotiation, collaboration, and input at all levels. In the femininity, they sort of try to avoid the old boys club. Workplace is flexibility and work-life balance is really important. Both are terms of job design. Organizational environments are a bit flexible. Then you have the next one, which is the uncertainty avoidance. And in this one, index. So with societies, this is the dimension that describes how well people can cope with anxiety. So in societies that score high for this, people attempt to make life as predictable and controlled as possible. So if you're working in an uncertainty, people in low uncertainty avoidance, these countries are more relaxed and they're more open and inclusive. So if you're working in a job or a company that's high in this area, it's probably more conservative, rigid, structured. There are many social conventions. People are expressive. It's clear and concise about the expectations and goals, and they recognize that there may be unspoken rules. And also in this one, if you are in this part of the index, you recognize that emotions and anger, vigorous hand gestures may be simply part of the conversation. However, if you're low in this area, you ensure that people remain focused, but you don't create too much structure. Titles are less important because it's considered more showing off. Openness to change or innovations are very generally exclusive. Then the next one is long-term and short-term orientation. Now, what Hofstede said is with each one of these, we have to take them into consideration in the workplace because they all will play a part in terms of understanding what a country has to offer and what a workplace within a certain environment has to offer. So if it is long-term, in this case, people often wonder how to know what is true. This dimension is this is the pragmatic this is the one that's pragmatic. So the long-term orientation, these are people that believe in a very modest way. They avoid talking too much about themselves. People are more willing to to compromise, yet they may be willing to be clear of what's outside. There's thrift and education are seen positive, modest. However, short-term orientation, people often want to know why. They're strong, they have very strong convictions. The people tend to oversell themselves. They sell themselves and to be taken very, very seriously. Flattery empowers. Values and rights are emphasized. And then the last one is indulgence and restraint. With this one, people that are high in terms of indulgence and restraint, they are very optimistic. There's a very importance to freedom of speech, focus on personal happiness. So indulgence is really a lot about self, really the importance of my own personal happiness, and they don't take life too seriously. They encourage debate and dialogue, and in meetings, people are, they prioritize feedback, they emphasize flexible working, they avoid making jokes, or they will be the type that will joke, so it's very relaxed. However, the opposite of that is a culture of restraint. So this culture is more controlled and very, very rigid. There are a lot of rules put into place in terms of actions and behaviors. People in the workplace would never really make a lot of jokes when engaged in formal. It sort of has to be kept professional. There's no time for any kind of relaxation. And they only express negativity about the world when they're outside of the organization. So with Hofstede, with these 6 dimensions, with these six dimensions, he went on to say,
Debbie, sorry to interrupt. Nicole has been raising her hand patiently, so I told her I will interrupt you when you were done.
Okay.
I'm going. Oh, she lowered her hand. Okay.
Go ahead.
It's not anymore. Thank you.
Oh, okay. All right. So with these 6 dimensions, again, as I said, these are on the Canadian workplace, but I want to talk to you one about the power distance. And power distance is the degree to which people accept inequality and accept the role of hierarchy. So here's an example of power distance. In Canada, Canada has a very low power distance cultures. Managers are acceptable and approachable. There's a tradition of employees being involved in decision-making. They become part of the team, people's opinions, the boss comes and talks to you, you know, people are invited. However, if we look at the Philippines, and I know in Canada in the workplace, there are a lot of Filipinos. Philippines have a very high power distance culture. So managers are usually more distant, more remote. Employees may feel more distance from the managers, and when they do have access to managers, it's just this whole bout of respect. I want to share a story. Another country that has very high power distance is India. So I work in the School of Continuing Ed International, and some of the classes I have Indian students. So we were talking about this, and they were saying to me, "Oh, miss, I got to tell you a story." I said, "Well, what happened?" They said, "I was at work and my boss came out and he came to talk to me, and I got very frightened because I thought, what did I do wrong? Why is he here?" And she said, "I started to doubt everything about myself." And in turn, she said, the boss just wanted to come and talk to me to see how things were going, to see if I had any trouble. And then I had spilled something, and the boss went and got the mop and he wiped it up. And she said, I was very, very surprised at what this was like. And I think the boss had seen that she was a bit surprised. So he sort of began a conversation. And from this conversation came the different viewpoints of culture. So that was a really great moment because they took the opportunity to discuss the differences. And with this young gal, she then understood, she learned a little bit about the Canadian workplace culture and how it was different than her own personal role of how she saw work and what the workplace should look like. So that I always think that that's a wonderful story that really talks about power distance in terms of Hofstede. So in the government of Canada, again, anytime you see this government of Canada, this is a quote that's taken from them. They said, use Hofstede's country comparison tool to explore differences in values between countries. So the government is saying, use this tool. It's going to help you. And perhaps if you were an employee, you maybe could point it out to your employees. If you're an employer, you might point it out to your employees, or if you're an employee, you could look it up if your employer is of a different nationality, or maybe you might have 2 or 3 different nationalities in this beautiful, diverse country that we work. And it might be able to help you understand a little bit about it. And here is the link. And this is, I'm not sure, Olga, if you can put that link in the chat.
I will do right now.
Okay, so there's a link, and this is what it looks like. I'll show you. And when you look it up, you find this. It says a country comparison. And what you do is where it says type country, you can type a country in and you can type up to 4 and it'll look like this when you actually go in. So I used Austria because it had a very low power distance, Canada and the Philippines, and you could put a 4th in. So what you can do, and we don't have time to do this right now, but if you actually click on Austria below, and for about 2 or 3 pages, it will explain each one of the 6 matrix about that country. If you do Canada, it'll explain what the matrix is, and then it'll explain what it means in terms of Canada. So this is a very good tool that is given to us by the Government of Canada. So if we use this Geert-Hofstede in relationship and put it back to the iceberg model, I really think that this can be a guide. This Hofstede can be a guide to understand the beliefs and values of an employee or an employer who may be new to the Canadian workplace. It's just really can explain a lot if you are an employer or if you are an employee and you just don't understand, this might be a way to help understand. It also can provide insight on the Canadian cultural reasons for certain norms and business practices. And that's what are these reasons for these cultural identifiers, the way that we do things around here in Canada. So that might help with that. And then you also can compare the cultural differences to help bring about success of understanding in the workplace. So this really is a model that can answer a lot of questions. It can bring a lot of really good discussion. It can be used as training. There is a lot that you can do with it. So when we talk about the basis of the beliefs of the organization, the beliefs, the goals, the basis of how an organization in Canadian workplace is, we have to remember that there are expectations and understandings that form the Canadian organizational cultural practices. And one way to understand them is by understanding the cultural iceberg of the person, their beliefs, their values, and plus understand that each company, each organization in Canada has its own cultural iceberg of its own beliefs and values and the way that it works. So let's look at the next part, the values, the Canadian workplace cultural expectations. So what is that central part of this iceberg that we're working with. So now we talked about the underlying assumptions. Now let's talk about the ideals, the goals. What are the values? What we say about the company, the people that are working within this company. So when we talk about cultural identifiers, and these are the specific actions that make up the values of the company. They establish the identity of the group or the culture. So respect, the way that people operate, integrity, honesty, all of these are part of what a company can value. The whole idea of teamwork, working together, being on time, decision-making, are you in a company that has training? Is it a company that's a training-based company? Is experience and learning, acknowledging and the skills of the people that work within your company? So when we talk about the Canadian company or workplace culture, we talk about the identifiers. So it's important to know how to present yourself within a Canadian context. So if you are new to the Canadian workplace, or if you have somebody that is new to the organization or to the workplace, it's important that they know how to present themselves in a Canadian context, because if they, a lot of times people know how to present themselves from what they know. But if it's different, then it could be a little bit of some misunderstanding that's happened. So let's take a look at one of the cultural identifier, which I think is a big one. And perhaps some of you have dealt with this: time. All right, let's do a little poll here. Choose one of the statements that you identify with the most. You could just pick one. So which ones resonate with you? All right. So as we can see that the majority of the people, first of all, before I even say anything, I just want to say that all of these are correct, depending where you are in the world. So some may be more correct, depending where you are in the world. In the Canadian workplace, Canada is, and I think you may know, Canada is very, very strict about time. It's about being on time. It's about chunks of time. It's about getting things done. And so if you picked B and C, those two really go hand in hand for what Canada is about. It's about being on time and getting things done. Believing in being, it's okay to be 10 minutes late, or it's okay, or, if I'm having a meeting, even though we have an hour set, it's more about the relationship that's happening. And yes, sometimes that can happen in a situation if perhaps you both are from a company and you understand that that's going to, the way that it's going to be. But within the Canadian, sorry, I can share the results. There you go. So if you take a look here, which is interesting because both B and C, that would be the Canadian workplace culture. If you picked A or D, Perhaps you come from a culture where it's perhaps you're a newcomer to Canada. Perhaps part of your cultural beliefs is that it is about relationships. It is about people. And so that would still be part of your belief system. Working in Canada, however, the belief system is you get it done, and it's done, and you have a beginning and you have an end. All right, so thank you. And this is another very interesting thing, because with this poll comes, wait, I gotta stop sharing. Okay, sorry about that. All right. So time in the Canadian workplace actually can bring about misunderstanding. Time is one of those identifiers that has brought about and can bring about misunderstanding in the Canadian workplace. I knew another person that was new to Canada. They got a job and they kept being 10 minutes late. 10 minutes late. And their boss said, look, you can't be 10 minutes late. You got to be on time. I'm paying you. Then they said, it's only 10 minutes late. Eventually, I met up with that person and they said, you know what? I lost my job. And somewhere to me, it was a little bit sad because there was a gap of understanding. You know, it's like, and I sat down with this person and we talked about time and Canada and the country that they came from that was a very relationship, and, you know, time was a bit more flexible. Time is so important. Time is so important that there's actually been a study, people study time, and it's called chronomics. And there are two particular types of time. The first one is what we call monochronic time, which is Canada. And, you know, we always hear these sayings, a stitch in time saves time. Time flies. It's all about being very linear. It's about time is in slots. It's in chunks. We have agendas. It's about clocks. Often you'll see people pointing at their clock. It's if they're late, or we go, come on, come on, come on. So it's all very linear. Canada is a monochronic society. However, the opposite of that is polychronic. Polychronic is what we call island time. You know, it's like I'm going on a holiday and I'm going to relax. That's what us monochronics say. But when you go into a polychronic society, it really is relationship based. It's about sitting down a lot of times over a meal, talking about business. You know, a lunch that we might say is from 1 to 2 could go from 1 to 3. And then it's very, very flexible. And it's a what did you get to do list? And instead of what do I have to do list? And if you have an employee who is coming from a polychronic, or if you're polychronic going into a monochronic workplace, then there could be this misunderstanding. So much so that in Canada, a lot of time management strategies are often used to facilitate those that come from a very polychronic society culture to one that to help them to be more successful in the monochronic environment of Canada. Again, this is one of those things that is so important, and it says Canada, we're monochronic, is when the government of Canada says, to perform your duties fairly and efficiently, you must be punctual so that you can be relied upon by the people with whom you work. That is a nice monochronic statement, but that's what our culture is of our country. That is our work culture. I always say to people, this isn't right or wrong. It's not that yours is wrong and mine is right. They're right for where they are, but this is what it happens to be in Canada. So a lot of people need understanding. Perhaps they need guidance or they need some training to help with this. So if we look back now, we go back to the basis. Now we have this belief system, and then we have these values of how we are to operate. The values that we have often will come out of our belief systems. The values can often come out of what we call the code of conduct. A code of conduct is your set of beliefs and values. So a code of conduct it's that written set of guidelines that's given by an organization to its workers and manage it. What it does is it's saying, this is how you need to conduct this is how you need to act to be in accordance with the rules of our company, to be in accordance with what we are doing. Companies will have code of conducts, maybe or maybe they'll have a mission statement, or they'll have best practices, but there's usually some kind of code of conduct. And a lot of times when you get hired on a job, they'll give them to you to read. This is what you need to do. But out of the code of conduct comes your expectations. So for people that are newcomers to Canada or have moved here, again, the government, the IRCC, which is the Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship of Canada, they have a code of conduct to say, when you move to Canada, this is how you need to conduct yourself. And that's conduct yourself wherever you are. But especially, a lot of the workplace will take and write their code of conducts that is very, very reflective of the code of conduct of Canada. So it's also important to note that to the reader, or to you, is to note that these code of conduct that's written to the Immigration and Refugee Status of Canada, this is also elements. These are elements that are taken from the values and ethics for all of the people of Canada. In this code of conduct, there are some main points, and we don't have a lot of time, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of an introduction. So in this code of conduct, it talks about respect for democracy. You know, a lot of people that come to Canada do not come from a democracy. They come from a different way. So what does it mean to live in a democratic country? You know, and respect for the people, how we treat each other, the way that people's own personal iceberg, their own values. Everybody has their own sort of code of conduct of where they have come from. So this is really a check. Is it the same or is it different? If it's a little bit different, then that's where that understanding needs to happen so that a person can be successful within the Canadian workplace. So again, there's a whole piece on respect for people. What does that mean? Integrity. You know, being honest, you know, being transparent, integrity, stewardship, really about helping one another. So if you are coming from perhaps a workplace that's very hierarchical, stewardship might be where you really don't help each other. It's more about me and about maybe climbing the ladder. But stewardship is more than that. It's about how you keep your building, the place of your office, the way that you keep it. It's all of that. It's that understanding that you are a steward to others and to where you work, your office. Then it's excellence. What does it mean to be excellence? And a lot of times companies will do workshops on excellence. They may have, you know, you may get a promotion on excellence. There may be a company, maybe a little competition to show, you know, maybe after first quarter, who maybe sold the most, they get a little prize. So these are types of excellence. Then out of that comes, what are you responsible for in the workplace? You know, do you just go and work? Being part of the Canadian workplace says that there's other things you need to do. And this is all documented in the code in the Government of Canada, if you want to read more about it. And then, of course, there's discrimination and harassment. We know that this is very important in Canada, but the way that this looks can vary around the world in terms of what is discrimination, what is harassment in different countries. So it's really important, especially in this one, for people that are newcomers to Canada, new to the workplace. What does that mean? What can I say? What can people say to me? What can't people say to me or do to me, or what I can do to others? So this one is really lined out very specifically. And with this code of conduct, it really gives a really good outline. These are the values of the people. So if you have people in that really are working for your organization, that really follow the values within this code of conduct or the code of conduct of your company, then they're going to resonate. You're probably going to have really good workers that are going to be with you because they buy into it. And as I had said before, if you have somebody that's coming in and maybe doesn't follow or in line with that, you may have to help them to become successful, or it may not work. Perhaps they just don't want it. So in that case, that's sometimes where you might have it where people, there's a little bit difficulty, maybe there's a little bit of office dissension. And this is one way maybe to try to figure it out if it's somebody who's new to the Canadian workplace. So that's the values. Then now let's take a look at the physical, that part of it that you can see. These are the visible, the dress code. What does your workplace look like? Is it a team? What are the actions of your employees that people can see? So again, these are the behaviors. These are the systems, the processes, the policies. When you go into a company, they're evident. You can see them, you can read them. They might have them hanging on the wall. The way that people dress, maybe they're in uniforms, maybe they have to wear suit and ties, maybe it's more casual. And you go and sit down or you go to the desk and they have a process for everything and they might be different. It's interesting because I sometimes say to my students, I was talking to one of them and they were moving from one bank to another and they had a little bit of complaining. I said, what's going on? He said, well, we didn't do it like that in my last place. And I was telling them, and I had said to them, I said, and they had done this course. I said, each company has its own cultural iceberg. And I said, the cultural iceberg of your one bank is set up. But if you go work at a different bank, even though it's a bank, there might be some cultural things that are the same. There probably are some differences. But when you move to a new place, I think one of the last things that people that have been there maybe a long time, maybe they don't want to hear, well, in my last place, we used to do it like this. We used to do it like this. Change. And if you're going to do that, I always say you might have to wait a little. Take a look around, watch how things are done, learn how things are done. And then perhaps, you can talk about, if there's something, you can offer suggestions. And again, that comes as part of how the behavior in which we have. So when we talk about behaviors and systems, these are the physical, they're the expectations on how to present yourself professionally. And they are what we see. They are the things that are visible when we walk in, how you act, what's around the room, what's in the office, how are people on the telephone. And so these are company cultures. So first there's appearance. Within any company, it's the appearance. Is it formal? Is it informal? What's the setup like of the company? Is it all very open? Is it very, a bit more office space? Then there's the food. Are there celebrations that are held where food is shared? Is it common once a month we bring in food? Do we celebrate people's birthday? That is a cultural identifier. Then there's the dress code. Is it formal or informal? Is there casual Fridays? And a lot of times companies are very particular about what dress code is. And in the Canadian workplace, if you're going to your job for the first time, it's probably always better to dress a little bit more than to dress down, because it's always about that first impression. Then what's the language spoken? In Canada, we have French and English as our official languages. Perhaps you're doing international work with a company and perhaps there's another language that might be beneficial. So what are they? And what are the symbols and traditions? What is the logo of the company? What are the company colors? Do they have letterhead? What is their sign? Are there any traditions that maybe once a year, do they follow the celebrations, or do they sort of remain neutral throughout the year? And then, of course, the last thing is the actions. We can see the actions. This is the professionalism. And this is a very big part of the Canadian workplace, is our actions. Because if you're working for a company, they want you to be the best employee you can. And they want you to do that by having these 10 characteristics. So they want you to dress for success, confidence, do what you say and do, and you will do what you say you will do. If you are going to do something, you say it. That's part of your integrity. Be an expert in your field. If you've been hired to do something, be that expert. And really behave morally and ethically. Be on the up and up, be transparent, and maintain your poise. So if something goes wrong, don't be the person that maybe is you're the person that's going to keep the cool head. You're the person that's going to try. Poise is keeping your head sort of, and that confidence. Have good phone etiquette. Phone etiquette is such a big one. The way that you answer the phone. What do you say? How do you end the phone call? I can remember when I was working in Africa, I forget what country, had a secretary, Claire. And every time I would phone her, I would talk to her, and then she would hang up. Now, and she would do that to all of us that worked. But then all of a sudden it became to be a problem, because I was working for an international company and she was talking to people out of Houston and she was hanging up on them. So then they started saying, like, what's going on over there? So Claire, that was very culturally correct of her to do that. But when you are working for an international American organization, company, there's a little bit of cultural learning. So we had a discussion, and I had gone and I had given her some phone etiquette of how to conduct herself when she's working with the American company. And in the end, she was great. And then make sure you strike the right tone. When you're working with people, having the correct tone of confidence of what you're doing. If you're asking them to do something for you, that's really important. Be structured and organized in what you're doing, and own up to your mistakes. So if you be accountable. And that's a really, oh, yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I know this is a lot to say and do. We only have 3 minutes left.
3?
Yeah, 3 minutes left.
Okay.
So if you don't mind, just wrapping up, and then if we have time for a couple questions.
Okay, I can do that. All right. So from this, we have the 10 characteristics. So very quickly, one of the very big things is our first impressions when we make in Canada. There's that importance of the handshake, to 4 to 6 seconds. Also, when we make first impressions, and this is a whole lot, for Canadians, making eye contact, listening, not interrupting, reading body cues, standing up. All of these are very important in the Canadian workplace. And this is sort of the last part, which comes great, is that really to be aware of workplace etiquette. And in the Canadian workplace, and this is part of the top, be tactful, use proper phone etiquette, know how to interrupt, understand those office day-to-day etiquettes, fill the paper copier, make another pot of coffee, knowing when to make a phone call, being aware of your odors. If you might like the smell of garlic, but maybe somebody else doesn't. Knowing how to respect your space. Canadians love space. You don't do that. And then when you're networking, knowing how to network. In the Canadian workplace, a lot of misunderstandings can happen. And this is what I'm going to end with, that there are some misunderstandings that are that happen in the Canadian workplace. And I'm just going to go ahead. And the way that you are successful in the Canadian workplace is acknowledge cultural expectations, supporting the beliefs and the values of the company. And my last slide actually is, how do you build a supportive Canadian culture? Teamwork is important. If you have somebody new coming into the Canadian workplace, put them in a team. Put them as part of a team that understands your company beliefs and values, and they can mentor and they can learn and they will work, and you are here helping. Use team building activities that support your beliefs and values. Best practice sessions are another way, but also cultural awareness training. If you have a company that has lots of different cultures in it, bring in somebody to do cultural awareness training. Try to bring everybody on the same board where they can understand the beautiful differences that we all bring from our cultures, so that we aren't judging and being biased. But by having this training, we go into where we are understanding and we can work together. And that's the end. Now, do you have any questions? There was so much in this workshop in terms of Canadian workplace culture. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Well, we want to thank you, Debbie, for taking the time to do these. And I love your passion, my sensei. This is a fantastic topic. We need to keep educating ourselves and that building that bridge between misunderstanding to actual understanding and empathy for others. So thank you so much, Debbie, for doing these and for taking the time to do these. We're hoping to work together with a new certificate to make these classes available in detail for people to acquire those skills that keep going, spreading the good work and integrating everybody into the workplace.
Thank you.
One question in the Q&A, it says, how do you think COVID pandemic has affected, if at all, Canadian work culture?
Well, I think it's affected workplace culture everywhere. I think that when we go back to work, when it's over, I think we're going to find a whole bunch of new ways of working. I think and that's a whole other discussion, but I think there's going to be a whole new way of working and the approach to how people actually work. But I hope that it never gets to the point where we don't have some interaction. I think the interaction, the mentoring, the collaboration is really an important part of work. And I know we do a lot of that now on Zoom, but there's something about face-to-face that's always quite nice too. But Zoom is nice because you can bring people in from everywhere. So that's part of the new way of working. I don't know if I answered your question. I think it'll have an effect. Did I answer your question?
I hope you did. Tatiana hasn't said anything. There's another question in the chat. It says, is there something more you can say about misunderstandings? I have made cultural mistakes previously, and these would really, really help.
Yeah, you know, that I know that's easy to happen, especially when you don't know. So a lot of times I ask a question, you know, if I'm talking, I will say to them, you know, this is my perception, or if you've made the mistake, you could even just say, I'm not sure. Maybe you could explain to me, how do you see that? Or what do you think? Ask them, and then it becomes a little bit of a feedback in terms of training, and you both can come out of it. That happened to me once too. And I was talking and I had said something, it was about the role of a woman. And so what I often will do when I'm talking, I'll say, in Canada, this is the cultural expectation. That's when I was working abroad. But when you're here, yeah, get into the conversation, really ask the question. You know, if you made a mistake, ask them, say, you know, I am so sorry. Like, can you explain? And then that might be a good way to start an open discussion about other things that perhaps they can learn, or you can learn, or the way that it has to be. I always think giving people a little bit of an introduction to the workplace is a really good thing, a little bit of training. And I know a lot of people that are coming into our culture, because I taught Link and literacy for newcomers to Canada. And there are a lot of things. I always say, never assume that the other people know. Never assume. you can ask, you can say, you might, you know what, you might be aware of this, but if you don't, this is what we do. But never assume. I have learned that is my lesson over and over that I would like to pass on. Thank you for that, because I forgot to say that. I hope that helped.
It did, Debbie, a lot.
Okay.
The thing is, like we always say, keep the conversation going.
Yeah.
Take advantage of those break times, or jumping into people in the hall, or right now with the chat, with Teams, whatever software they use for communication, to try to learn from others. There's always a new thing that you can learn and understand. I think that's the main thing, trying to know why things are happening, and sometimes it's having difficult conversations, easy, but it's something that we need to make more common, and don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Right. Yeah.
That's
There's
another-
so much to that. There's so much discussion in this Canadian workplace that, if you are an employee or you're working, and maybe you have a couple people that are from different nationalities, maybe you might give them your own little short version of cultural training. Use a little bit of that Hofstede, or you can talk about that, or just even say these are the expectations of Canada. What did you do in your country before you came to Canada? How did you handle that? What about time in your country? Or with your boss, if your boss comes to talk to you, how does that feel? Like in your country, did your boss talk to you? So in your culture. So that's a way to get the conversation going. And I always say, ask questions, both ways, ask questions.
Yeah. Ask questions is a big one. Sometimes we're afraid to even make mistakes and not ask the right question, or offending people. And we can start asking the question like that. I hope I don't offend you, but I have a question. And this is a responsibility for everybody involved in an organization, whether you are Canadian, newcomer, immigrant. I think it's a responsibility for everybody to take action into incorporating, understanding, having these conversations, and becoming more cultural competent.
Right.
As well. There's a comment here. Jillian Kemp says, if you want someone on campus to discuss work in Canada, you can make an appointment with the office career. And then Robin says, there are large differences in culture between different provinces, for example, Quebec, Toronto, and Calgary. Yes, even within an Edmonton, right? Like David was saying, every organization has their own culture.
Yeah, and they do. And, Canada is a whole cultural iceberg. But within that iceberg, each province has its own cultural iceberg. Each family has its own cultural iceberg. But it's just understanding that there are differences between us. We're all part of the same. We're all part of this Canadian cultural iceberg. But we have to find out, how do we fit into that? But there are differences. I know that if in Quebec, when you go and greet somebody, you kiss them on the cheek. If you come here into Edmonton and you go to kiss somebody on the cheek, sometimes they might go back, because culturally that's not acceptable. Yeah. And even like Olga said, the difference between Edmonton and Calgary. Yeah, there's some differences. So never assume that they're the same. And but I would totally agree with you, Robin. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the one that you said, understanding there are differences. There are differences, and we need to understand. Maybe sometimes agree 100%, but understand where they're coming from and where you're coming from. Right? There's another comment. I've come from organizations in the nonprofit sector where its own culture is not very well defined, and it was a point of frustration for a lot of employees, trying to be too casual and not outlining things clearly in contracts, for example. I believe it's also up to the leaders to provide that direction. Absolutely.
And that is one of the styles of working. That is a style of working where a lot of NGOs do that, where it's about relationship, and where there's the friendship and the management there, sometimes the boundaries can get a bit cleared, but it's a style of working that can work. But that's one of the, and I think you pointed that out, the negative side. But if a person comes from a culturally, their own cultural iceberg is where they like those divisions. And if you go back to what Hofstede said, you know, in that one part about wanting the divisions, some people might want that. So that's where they might struggle a little bit, but just, I guess, knowing and understanding that that's how it works. So yeah, I would agree with you. That is a style of working. That's one of the styles of working.
And another thing that I always tell people is do your research clearly when you apply to jobs, not only for the position, but also for the culture of the company. If that's a place that you will like to work, if that's your working style, because otherwise there's a lot of misunderstanding when you get the job and when you're in the organization. So that's part of the homework.
I always say to people, read their beliefs, read their code of conduct, read their values. Do they align with it? Is that what you're like? Do you want to work for a company that believes that? If you do, you're probably going to be successful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Debbie, I know we could talk about this for hours, especially you and me.
Yeah.
Already 11 minutes after the time. And I just want to thank everybody as well for joining us and for just participating and bringing their own ideas and sharing, which is really important. And again, to you for taking the time to do this. I know how much work you put into this and I really, really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. Stay tuned. I posted the chat. The next webinar next week is about photography. We're going to have a series of webinars related to different topics. So stay tuned in our Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn pages as well. And if you have any questions, you know how to reach to us. And we will be sharing Debbie's presentation in the next couple of days for you. Have a lovely day and enjoy the weekend and the warmer weather finally. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a lovely day.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day and happy weekend.